Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of The Inside Factor, where we bring you uncensored and unfiltered news. I'm joined here today by Phakamile Majola, a media strategist, as well as Kim Heller, a media strategist as well as a political analyst. Guys, welcome to my tea party. Now, Kim, I want to start with you. I want to find out, how was it like growing up as a South African, especially a white South African during apartheid?
Well, as I say, every single white South African in this country, including myself, past, present, or future, is a child of privilege. So I had a childhood filled with privilege, and let me say unearned privilege, because my privilege and my good childhood and financially secure childhood was done on the back of black pain that white people pretend that they didn't know about. But my privilege was the basis of structural oppression of what people call their fellow black South Africans. But for most white people, they don't care at all about their fellow black South Africans. And that is very evident, not only under an apartheid society, but in our new democracy. So what my book tries to do, which is called No White Lies, is to uncover the fact that our rainbow nation is nothing more than a great white lie.
And then do you feel as though white South Africans fully understand the kind of privilege that they have, or it's something they just downplay?
I don't even think they recognize it. So for white people, they are in prime positions in society because they've worked hard and because they're entitled to it. There's a lack of understanding. But what I find absolutely morally bankrupt is that white South Africans do not even acknowledge their privilege. Not only should they be acknowledging their privilege, but they should be making reparations for ill-gotten wealth through land taken by force, not through dialogue that the ANC government want to have now, but through brutal force, the dislodgement of black families, the fracturing of the lives and fortunes of black South Africans in this country. So when I raise white privilege, I get attacked from all quarters of white South Africans who are saying, don't speak on behalf of me. I'm not privileged. So there's this complete, I think I say in one of my articles, which is in my book, do white people have a moral compass? And my answer at this stage is that I don't think so, because as white South Africans, including myself, we've had marathon opportunities to account for the acts of deep crimes against humanity, but we have not ever risen to that occasion. Nobody is saying, let us return the land, let us return what has been taken from us, what our forefathers took from people. So we have this generation of white South Africans saying, oh, but I'm a freeborn. You know, I didn't do anything wrong, without acknowledging that there've been centuries of black disempowerment on the back of white privilege and white power, illicit white privilege and illicit white power. And you know, one of the tragedies to me of the ANC government is that what they're doing is that they're almost cementing black poverty as a normal thing in society and white wealth as a normal thing in society. And it breaks my heart that our children may grow to think that is a normal thing, rather than an orchestrated monstrosity of history on the back of white power. And I speak a lot about white power in this book because I had hoped that it would fall with the advent of democracy and a black government being in place. But all we see under the ANC government is a jackpotting almost of white power. It's almost like there's been a license to continue to loot, you know, an extension of the tender, because white people are doing very well in this rainbow nation of ours.
Now, Phakamile, for you to come in there, I want to find out more about you. Walk me through your life growing up during this time of uncertainty, and does that contribute to your political and social outlook today?
Well, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1980, and 1994 was a very powerful moment for me. I was 14 years old when that first democratic election happened. And so I grew up basically under apartheid, experienced the transition, and now we're here today. And during that time, I was fortunate enough to be educated in some of the best schools in the country. I was a bursary child. My parents are working class. My dad was a teacher at Phakamile Secondary School, now retired. My mom was a nurse. So I got exposure to this very, very high level education where I was surrounded by some of the richest people in South Africa. The kids I went to school with, their fathers are board chairpersons, you know. And so it really had a huge impact on how my outlook on life. One foot in the dusty streets of Pimville and later in Spruitview, and another foot in the privileged, you know, manicured lawns of white society. So I feel like I got first-hand exposure of white people from a very, very young age. And yeah, I've had very, very different experiences which have changed my worldview and have informed the person that I've become now. I'm in a space where I'm a spokesperson for the biggest trade union in the country, and I use my voice to amplify the voices of the African working class. And I do that consciously and deliberately because of my exposure, because of my upbringing, and because even though I have been lucky enough to have better opportunities, I'm very well aware of the privilege of white privilege and the dominance of white people in South Africa, the lack of transformation, and the fact that we still have very, very far to go in order to, to actually have the freedom that our parents and our forefathers fought for in this country.
Now, you mentioned something very interesting. You were going to school with white kids firsthand, and during that time, you're probably the first black child in the school, in the class. Now, for someone who's also went to school with many white children, did you at any point in life during your school years, you start losing your blackness, if I could say so?
I was accused of that many times. Especially because of the way I speak. I've been told I have a very posh accent. And I suppose you could say that because of how immersed I was in whiteness. And the one thing I can say, having gone to these schools and been exposed to white institutions or institutions where whites dominate, is that one of the first things that's almost demanded of you as a black person is not just that you must assimilate, but you must strip yourself. You must strip yourself of your race. You must strip yourself of your culture. You must be as white as possible while being black. And that is something that is almost actively encouraged. When I was growing up, for example, we were not allowed to speak our African languages at school. We would copy the white girls and pretend we had long hair. Everything about whiteness was celebrated. Everything about being black was looked down upon and viewed with suspicion. It was done either overtly, sometimes it was done in a very insidious way. But what I can tell you is that even today, that kind of practice continues. I worked in two very big media houses, ENCA and 702, and that culture is very prevalent in any institution where white people dominate. That is how you feel as a black person. I remember, for example, when I was entering broadcasting, it was not popular for black broadcasters to have heavy African accents, especially on certain channels. Certainly not at ENCA, that I can say, because we fought that battle. No. But the point I'm making, and I know I talk a lot and I apologize in advance, but the point I'm making is that, we in South Africa, we've been very quick to celebrate the Rainbow Nation. We've been very quick to celebrate that 1994 moment, but we don't want to deal with the big, ugly elephant in the room, which is that whiteness and white supremacy dominates in this country.
Now, before we go into ENCA and the Rainbow Nation, Kim, I want to find out from you. You've mentioned how white people have come out to say, don't talk about me, focus on yourself, speak from your point of privilege. And there's a point in your book, you mentioned how you've lost certain contracts and certain work that you've lost because of, if I can quote, her articles are a problem. Now, walk me through that.
Well, I've lost numerous opportunities. I mean, I've become a pariah and in the corporate sector, and I think my views have rendered me unemployable. So I have to write books, and I'll continue to. But I think it's my experience is this experience of many people. This country is so caught in a single narrative, and I use possibly the better term is to say the master narrative, and the pun is intended on that. So I have dared to challenge the master narrative. I think journalists, and I mean, we've all come from that media sector, who have dared to challenge the master's voice, have found themselves economically stranded and unemployable. Despite being probably the best in the business, we are rendered unemployable because we have dared to challenge that. But I must tell the many distractors that I have, I will continue to tell the truth. As costly as it is, I will continue to tell the truth. And I do believe, this book has been phenomenal. It went into print about 8-9 weeks ago, and I've sold almost 800 copies. So it's heading towards being a bestseller actually pretty soon. And I'm very thrilled about that. And my support is coming from ordinary people. It's hardly even been in the bookshops, because I think there's a growing appetite amongst young Black South Africans for the truth, that they realize that nothing's changing. They've been told to bargain on hope and things are going to get better, but things aren't getting better. So the truth cannot be hidden forever. I mean, we even have a president who's sealing the truth about his funding. But I'd like to tell him on this platform that the truth about his funders is going to come out, because there are people who will relentlessly pursue the truth. The truth cannot be quarantined. Zonda can take a week off from the commission, but we're going to come back and we're going to be asking him difficult questions about where is Brian and why is there's the sudden blackout. So I think in the end, the truth will win. The truth will emerge about our public protector, for instance, who's been demonized. The truth will emerge about a president that we have who is little more than a media creation. I mean, anyone can challenge me about whether this man is a true leader or not. I would say no. Fact proves that this man is not a leader. He's constructed and manufactured by white monopoly capital and by the complicit media, who will continue to support him irrespective of what he does or what he doesn't do. I mean, there are big questions about corruption now, which were detailed in the Zondo Commission, but the media is mum about this. In fact, there's a deafening silence about this. I mean, God forbid this was Zuma with these charges over him. This country would be marching in the streets in these fake Save South Africa marches, But we have this absolute blanket of silence from the media. So there are some, including yourselves, that will speak out. And I must say, just to go a little slightly off track, I'm so delighted to be here. I'd like to say that Inside Factor was the first media agency or platform that asked me to be on the station. And I'm sorry it's taken so long to get here. But I have been absolutely fascinated and impressed with the work that you're doing. I've seen interviews with people like Judge Klope, who has been demonized and to such an extent. But when I've listened to the interviews, we are seeing a totally different version of the truth. So I commend you, and I really hope you go from strength to strength in telling the truth.
No, thank you very much for that.
Multiply yourself.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Phakamile, I want to jump off to you now. We've seen how certain people within our country who stand up to speak the truth are now dealt with. Now, I want to find out your thoughts. We've heard Kim says she's lost contracts because of her angry political statements that she's uttered in the past. Now, how many of young Black South Africans face that kind of trauma in the workplace today?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a problem in the workplace all the time. Anytime that you point out or stand up for yourself or try to advance an agenda of workers, you are going to find yourself in a situation where you are loggerheads with your employer. And if you just look at, I would argue that South Africa has probably some of the worst labor relations, just because of some of the issues that we find ourselves in NUMSA dealing with all the time. Even today, we still have white managers who treat Black workers like it's still the dark days of apartheid, where people beat up employees on the job for example. That was the case in a company called Score Metals. That happened 2 years ago. And I think it speaks volumes about how far we've come in this country. Look at the statistics, for example, with regards to transformation at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, transformation at management, executive level. How much representation is there? According to the latest statistics, only 2% of companies on the JSE are 100% black owned. I mean, that's a disgrace. So when you really think about it, we have a black government that's been in power for more than 20 years. But look at the state of the economy. Who owns and runs and controls the economy? Everything about South Africa in 2021 still largely represents the makeup that existed pre-1994, where you have, pardon me, ownership and control of the economy in the hands of a small minority, where you have millions of black people languishing in poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what exactly was it that we fought for? And it's very clear that whilst the working class had demands, those demands were never met. What we're seeing now is the ANC continuing to entrench the dominance of white people in the economy, in our culture, in all aspects of South African life.
Now, Kim, would you say that the ANC's alliance with COSATU to some way or another has contributed to the selling out of workers, to say?
I'm wondering if I should take a sip of my tea now before I answer that very difficult question. Okay, let me put it down, actually. So I think that we have to face some realities that there are very few organizations in this country that are serving the working class. And perhaps that's deliberate, because you can't serve white monopoly capital and white power and also empower your workers. You have to make a choice. So perhaps never has there been such a stark moment of the choice that the government has made and its so-called affiliates as Marikana, because there was a choice to say, do I favor and stand with white profit, or do I stand with my own people? And do I need to say anything more? We know the choice that was made. So I think, unfortunately, many of the so-called trade unions and particularly ANC-affiliated organizations have just proved that they're nothing more than agents of white power. And, I didn't choose the name of my book coincidentally. It took me a long time. And the word white power is very important, because I think black people understand politics, but I think whites understand power. And politics in the end is all about power. And there has been no interruption to white power. I often say the national anthem of the ANC government has been, and the Rainbow Nation has been, please do not disturb white privilege. And we've seen that. And which unions have actually stood up against white power? I mean, there's continuous abuse, as Phakamile is saying, of workers. I mean, we don't even have the minimum wage. It's scandalous what people are being paid. So I don't see them marching for that, but they'll join their white fellow South Africans marching against a black president. So what is the agenda of a trade union like COSATU? I think they've lost the plot, as the ANC lost the plot literally and figuratively with the Freedom Charter in 1955. COSATU has lost the workerist plot in this new Rainbow Nation.
Now, I want to come back to white people and the liberal sense with regards to marching. Now, I want to go to you now, Phakamile. Marikana, you have a president who was a former unionist himself. He then writes an email to say concomitant action must not be taken. What goes through your head at that moment?
Oh, Ramaphosa was a major disappointment when it came to Marikana. History gives you so many moments when you have, as Kim says, an opportunity to make a choice, and that choice could change history. Marikana was a very powerful moment in history. Here you had workers who chose to organize themselves outside of their trade union and make a demand. And the demand, when you analyze it, was not just a simple demand about an increase. They wanted a living wage. And they had identified that living wage as 12,500 Rand. That demand was about improving the quality of their lives. And for anybody who's actually gone to Marikana, you can understand fully where the anger of workers was coming from. Marikana is a wasteland. It's hell as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing there. It's a wasteland of poverty. You've got mine workers who are extracting the wealth of the country from the ground and are living like pigs in shacks with no access to water, no access to basic services, lawnmen making a fortune. And along comes Ramaphosa with ties to the trade union. You would have thought that in that moment, Ramaphosa would say, let's hold on. Let's hear what the workers have to say. Let's understand why have they chosen to sit on a kopi to make the demand as opposed to come to the boardroom to negotiate. What drove them to that point? What level of suffering could make you take such a drastic decision? He didn't do that. And he had all the power to change their lives in that moment. What did he choose to do? He chose to lobby members of the cabinet to take strong action, concomitant action, which, as we all know, we witnessed when those police fired on unarmed striking mine workers for simply demanding what was due to them and what had been promised to them by the ANC government since 1994. As a shareholder of a mining company, he knew that a mining house has a legal obligation to transform the immediate surrounding community through social plans. They submit social plans in order to get a license to mine. And Lonmin had not been adhering to that at all. And it was later discovered that they were shifting profits. This was the allegation that was made by progressive organizations like the AIDC, who said that this company was engaged in profit shifting. And so, so basically the full crime of white monopoly capital was playing itself out in this dusty little town of the Northwest. The ANC had an opportunity to right an ancient wrong. And they went and they sided with our masters.
Now, Kim, doesn't that to some extent show you the anti-blackness of the ANC? Now, I'm raising this because some people have said if the miners were white, they would have been dealt with very quickly. They would have been given their packages. They would have been given better homes. The salaries would have been paid. But then it was black workers. That's why they had to die the way he did.
Exactly. And I mean, actually, if we look back at the history of South Africa, we see even, I think, in the 1920s, the 1922 strike, where white miners were, their rights were accommodated and black miners weren't. But I mean, that was under an apartheid government. I mean, did we ever believe that under a democratic government, under a party that certainly I lobbied behind, and I used to worship the ANC government, the ANC as a liberation party, did we ever imagine that the same party would treat their own people in the same way as apartheid and colonial masters did? And that's a terrifying and painful reality. I'm going to be indulgent, and actually I'm quite moved by Phakamile's story. I'm just thinking, I don't know, you really need to write a book on this so soon, and the way you described it is so painful, actually. And we need to record these stories. For me, Marikana was a very important date in my own life, as it might be sheltered and white and protected, because I was a devotee of the ANC. I helped from 1994 in various ways, and I never would imagine that this kind of event would happen. And it actually I was so shocked by that and so heartbroken that it saw me moving to a political party, the EFF, on the back of my absolute disappointment with the ANC. But I haven't seen any activity, sadly, now that I look through lenses that aren't contaminated with nostalgia for this party, that the ANC has done anything that is pro-workers. And perhaps we need to face the stark reality that the ANC is not a pro-worker party, certainly not a pro-black worker party. So I think we have to look to, a body like NUMSA, who's, to me, possibly one of the only organizations that have stood their ground and have maintained a very strong position in terms of black workers. I'm sure there are others, but they certainly don't that doesn't exist in the ANC or amongst its affiliates. I mean, I met a member of the South African Communist Party the other day, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know that there were communists still in South Africa. Tell me, where are they?" Because the Communist Party has also become a lobby party for particular factions in the ANC. They seem more concerned about that, as does COSATU, with who is the president versus the fate of the ordinary day worker. I mean, both of those parties chose a capitalist for their president. So, I mean, what do we expect? We should expect nothing different.
Now, with regards to the South African Communist Party, many have labeled the Capitalist Party. Now, Phakamile, would you say that to some extent the South African Communist Party provides some sort of ideological back room for the ANC, if there is any ideology there?
Well, I think, look, I don't want to talk too much about the SACP because I think their track record speaks for itself. The ANC has made it very clear that they're anti-working class. It doesn't matter what they say. Look at their actions. Look at how, at the very violent attack on workers over more than 20 years. Even now, the way I see it, what's taking place, where you've got massive retrenchments taking place in many companies, and many people will say it's because of COVID. But I would argue that it's not just COVID. I would argue that what's happening now is being allowed to happen, is being able to happen, particularly under this administration of Ramaphosa, because the goal is to restructure South African capital for the benefit of capitalists. So whatever small gains workers may have made over the last 20 years, all of that is being rolled back under the name of COVID. Suddenly, companies want to be able to get away from the Labor Relations Act because of COVID. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the restructuring of South African capital. And the problem with the SACP is that they endorsed Ramaphosa and they pushed him as a candidate. And it wasn't just him. COSATU did this too, confusing the working class into believing that a billionaire could represent their interests. In terms of ideology, that's just not possible. The only way that is possible is if that billionaire commits class suicide. Ramaphosa there's no evidence of him ever committing class suicide. So, and I think what it's done is it's created, in my view, an opportunity for real socialist and real communist formations to come to the fore, which is precisely what NUMS has been trying to do, certainly since 2014, when it took the decision to establish a workers' party, the SRWP. Obviously it still remains to be seen whether that was successful or not, but I do think what it's done is it certainly put real ideological socialism back on the map, where it's become very clear where the line is. The working class must understand that the ANC government are butchers and have not been loyal and never will be loyal to them. What the working class in South Africa is voting. It's voting machine. That's it. But in terms of the macroeconomic framework that's been in place, it's 100% anti-working class. The results are the 43% unemployment and counting. That's the expanded definition. Poverty levels, which are skyrocketing, and the most unequal society on earth.
Now, I want to come back to the retrenchments, especially at SOEs. But before that, Kim, you joined the EFF. What made you join the EFF? Because what attracted you to that organization, and what made you leave?
How long do you have? Yeah, that's possibly an episode in itself. And as I said a bit earlier, that with being heartbroken that my party would do such a terrible thing at Marikana, I noted the development of the EFF, and my former student comrade from Wits, Dalimpofu, advocate Dalimpofu, I saw that he had joined EFF. And he said a very profound thing: I never left the ANC left me. And I think that's a very beautiful statement, and it resonated with me because what I stood for, it's not that I had made a change, it's that the ANC had become an animal that I never thought it would be. And he recognized that. And I joined EFF actually in 2014. And I must say it was a very profound time of my life. And I am deeply privileged to have been part of that organization. If we look at the cardinal pillars, the original cardinal pillars, if those were pursued fully, that would almost be the answer, if not the full answer, for South Africa. And today I'm no longer part of the party, but I have the ultimate respect for the thousands of fighters that I worked with across the country, and particularly in Alex. I've never seen more committed, selfless, intelligent fighters. I was very blessed to work with Julius and the team. He is one of the most intelligent people I've met. I left because I think there was a factionalism which outed from the organization a black consciousness element that I thought was necessary to take that party where it should be. And I was also very disappointed by the fact that they gifted. I speak in my book about an illegitimate gifting of votes to the DA. I mean, we worked through nights to get votes out. I wouldn't have voted for the EFF if I knew that my vote would go to a white party. And there's still a lot of controversy about what EFF what should they have done. I would have said, stand your ground as a brilliant young black party with a revolutionary agenda. Or go to the ANC and say to them, we'll vote with you on these conditions, that you force land expropriation without compensation. But it's still, my heart races when I think of the party that I was so enamored with, that I thought was challenging white supremacy and white power, actually giving votes to the power to a party that is a bastion of white power in this country. So it's still something that I would have liked the EFF to have done differently. So I think I've politically matured since I was actively involved in the EFF, because at the time I thought I was the first white leader in the EFF, and I thought that was a glorious thing. But I think it's a shameful thing. I think white people must stay away from black organizations. And I think that if we look at the role of white liberals in organizations, they've probably done more harm than good. And what is our purpose as white people to be in black organizations? I mean, we are the oppressors. As long as we don't hand back land and ill-gotten wealth, I remain the oppressor. So what am I doing interfering with black organizations? So I'm happily outside of that. There's no black organization that needs a white person in its party, certainly not in a leadership capacity. And I feel ashamed in a way that I took on that position, because there were hundreds of capable fighters who could have done a far better job than me. But I suppose it's the power of whiteness. I mean, at the time, I had like 46 requests or 50 requests a day for interviews. And I used to say to media, why are you speaking to me? I'm irrelevant. Go and speak to this person who lives in a shack in Alex, who's giving up everything to be part of this liberation movement. But the media is enamored by whiteness, So it's shameful, but I'm glad that I've had enough reflection to say I'm happily outside of the party. I still wish them luck. I do believe they've got a lot of radical appeal, and I suppose a little bit of my heart remains with them. I quite like this reconciliation with Zuma, although people say it may not be fake, because I believe that we must not forget that the teething gel of white supremacy is black disunity. So as a white person, I say any attempt for black unity is a very healthy thing. And I think white people often in this struggle have played very disruptive and divisive roles in black organizations. And as Steve Biko says, be careful of white people. There's no better white. White people must stay out of black struggles. And perhaps if you can just allow me to say one thing about this book, the one thing that I've been very clear on is that I'm writing this book as a white person, as a white settler. I describe myself as a foreigner in this country, not African brothers that are getting such a hard time with xenophobia. Actually, white people are the foreigners. So I speak very clearly from the vantage point of a white person, of a white privileged person. I don't speak to black people. I don't speak for black people. all I'm trying to do is to uncover the truths of white power in this country and show that the real pandemic that we have in this country is not COVID. It's white supremacy, because that is causing deep poverty for black people. It's killing black people every single day.
Now, staying on the issue of white people, during Save SA, we saw white people joining hands and protesting. Some were shouting, Zuma must go, but they've never stood up and protested with regards to poverty. Walk me through that as a white person in this country.
White people, in a way, I'm actually writing, this book is a teaser, not a teaser, it's a preamble almost to another book I'm doing, which is well in the works, on white supremacy in a post-apartheid society. And in a way, I almost say we must almost admire whites, because they're very good at looking after their self-interests. I mean, they're guided by that. They've maintained, even with a black government, their self-interests, which is white power over the economy. So, the white power it's very, very, very positive. So white people will get involved in little side struggles like this anti-Zuma thing, the Save South Africa. In fact, the white voice in South Africa has found expression in an anti-Zuma war cry. But they don't speak about poverty. They don't speak about land. Because what will that mean? It will mean that we're dealing with the real structural issues in this country, the real sins of our past, the original sin in this country, and the greatest act of corruption ever done in this country was land theft by white people. But now we're having years and years and years of debate on how do we give land back? Can black people farm? What are they going to do with the land? I mean, it's absolute nonsense. And in fact, the tolerance that black people have for white society, I think must stop, actually. It's just absurd. And in fact, the tolerance is giving license to white people to continue looting from black people effectively.
Phakamile, do you think black people are too nice? As she said, we keep on negotiating. We know how the land was taken. We know how we're dispossessed, but we keep wanting to ask and debate and go for all this parliamentary process. Do you think it's time for a revolution? And before you answer that, in Kim's book, she says the ANC has lost touch with the people. Do you fundamentally think that it's time for the ANC to leave?
Oh, like yesterday. I feel like the ANC's time is done. And I long for the day when the electorate will, in their masses, feel the same way. Because we have been betrayed. And I don't know how much more evidence we need that this organization will never live up to the expectations which we had. Even the minimum demands of the Freedom Charter were not even met at that level. So I do long for that day when that consciousness will reach the masses. Do I think that black people are too nice? Well, I think it's more about how we've been manipulated. I think there was a great deal of manipulation that took place post 1994. Certainly this term Rainbow Nation, which I have a real problem with, I must say, was, in my view, a way of manipulating the masses. It was a way of delaying the revolution that needed to happen. Because instead of us demanding land, which was a burning issue even way before the end of apartheid, instead of demanding reparations as we rightly should have, instead of demanding that justice in the truest sense of the word was done and every single apartheid criminal was found and locked up, we didn't do that. A lot of things were brushed under the table. I think some of it had to do with, I'm trying to remember those days in the early 90s. There was I know, and I'm speaking for myself, within my family, almost a sense of relief that apartheid was over. And I think the problem is we got too caught up in the relief that apartheid was over without actually looking at what did we get from this deal, from this agreement, from these negotiations which took place at CODESA. And it's only now that we're analyzing the fine print because of the major impact of those choices. Our lives largely have not transformed as Black people. And now we're starting to question, what exactly did we agree to in 1992 and 1991 when those talks were taking place? And also, I think the hideousness of apartheid, the brutality and the violence was so extreme. People were so keen to move on. I remember there was that sense when I was growing up, it was like, oh, we need to move on from this dark time. And we made a mistake. We rushed, I think, to move on. We needed to spend more time reflecting. I think we should have definitely made a lot more demands, and certainly at that time. And we were hoodwinked by this idea that, oh, we're a rainbow nation now, you know, apartheid is dead, therefore racism is dead. We're learning that the joke was on us.
Now, with regards to manipulation, people are talking about Codesa. People's names like Rolf Meyer come up. People like the FW de Klerk are coming up. And there's a Zulu saying, do you think it's about time that our generation starts going after people like de Klerk and Rolf Meyer, for example?
Absolutely. You know, I get so angry every time de Klerk is given a platform. This man was the last president of apartheid. I mean, a cockroach should not be welcome in your home. Why is this man on my TV screen? Why do they quote him? Why do I have to read his remarks? Where does he get the audacity to criticize Black leaders? What moral authority is he using when he has got millions of skeletons rattling in his closet? I feel that, you know, when Kim talks about privilege, I feel like there's an audaciousness that exists amongst white people, which allows them to, like de Klerk, to, you know, school us about good governance. Are you kidding me? De Klerk, you know? It's a disgrace. And what I think is so painful about that is this is happening under our Black government. He was endorsed and embraced by the ANC. Let's not forget that the ANC swallowed what was left of the National Party, you know? So those are some of the betrayals that I talk about when I talk about the ANC government. I do feel very strongly that until we come to a realization that this organization will not allow us to fulfill our goals and ambitions as a Black people, we are not going to get very far.
Now, Kim, in page 66 of your book, you talk about how journalism has been dipped in political partisanship. Walk me through that.
Yeah. You know, we must always be honest about everything. And hopefully, if anyone takes a message from my book, it's about I'm very honest and I'm telling things from a very true place of no white lies. And, you know, I can't say I'm not partisan. When I write for an anti-transformation narrative. Oh my gosh, you see, I'm sure there's white men of the capital disrupting this tea party. But I write with a particular bent. I want transformation in this country. And I'm tired of the master narrative. And I will consciously and unapologetically say I'm writing from that perspective. But I acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean that I can't be fair when I'm faced with facts. And so that's what I regard as good journalism. But what we see in the mainstream press is irrespective of fact, there is a propaganda being told. So we have the saint and sinner philosophy. I mean, Pravin Gordhan is a god.
Sinner.
He can't do anything wrong. And the same on the same side, Jacob Zuma cannot do anything right. And I write in one of my articles that even if Jacob Zuma saved a drowning child from a river, he would be seen as a villain in that case. He can do nothing right. And it brings to the fore, will this man ever get a fair and free trial? And I say no, because the media has already judged him. So it's deeply unfortunate. And I think I say in the book, when the truth dies, we die. Because we have to uphold the truth no matter what. And I mean, when Cyril Ramaphosa stands for corruption, let him have a free and fair trial. I'm not a supporter of his, but I hold his right to have a free and fair trial. If he happens to do something good, I'm still waiting actually, 2 years after he's been appointed. But when and if he ever does something good for society, I will say so. I will commend him on that. I'm waiting. But you know, there is an expression that I'm learning. One day is one day, so it could happen.
Pamela, you're a former journalist. What goes on in the newsroom?
Gosh, so much goes on in the newsroom. And I think what Kim is talking about, the partisanship of many media houses, is absolutely true. I think we must stop trying to delude the public. Journalists must not pretend that they can be objective. I remember having this debate with one of my former bosses at ENCA, who had a problem with the way I was characterizing the Fees Must Fall protests. He said I was being too personal about it. Because I knew those struggles as a former Wits student, as someone who was actually a member of the SRC at some point at Wits, education officer. And he felt I was losing my objectivity. I said, and I was very frank, I said, but I cannot be objective about my suffering. I don't know what do you expect me to do? I must climb out of my skin and stand outside of my, what does that mean? You know, I can only talk about what I know. And I must be honest about how I feel. And I think, so what happens in the South African media space is, in my view, very, very clearly partisan reporting in the way that factional battles of the ANC are being reported on. So this good guy, bad guy narrative that Kim talks about is absolutely true. Zuma has been portrayed as this, he's like Stefano De Mero. He's everywhere, he's evil, you know. It's amazing the powers this man has, you know. And I'm by no means trying to take away the responsibility, because as far as I'm concerned, Zuma is responsible for Marikana. He was president when it happened. So I do not exonerate him for anything, you know. But it is obvious that there is an agenda. Zuma has been characterized as a bad guy, and the Ramaphosa/Gordhan camp are the good guys. And so it becomes very difficult when you have to point out the failings of the so-called messiahs. For us, for example, in the space that I operate in at NUMSA, Pravin Gordhan has been a disaster, worse than a disaster. So brutal to workers in the most horrendous way. But you would be hard-pressed to find a media house that would characterize Pravin's actions as brutal, even though they really are. Thousands of workers, not just at SAA, not just at SA Express, Denel as well, who've gone months without salaries. Any other minister should be fired. But when it comes to Pravin Gordhan, I don't know, something happens in the South African media space. And it's this saint narrative that we have to defeat, because the problem with these narratives is that when these people reveal themselves to be the devils that they truly are, it becomes very difficult to then speak out against them, as is the case for some media houses.
Now, I want to stop you right there. I'm going to come back to Pravin and workers-related issues. You left ENCA. Was the Fees Must Fall a time in your life to say, listen, I'm done here? Because you even quote in your open letter, the heaven of racism. Walk me through that.
It was a journey. I would say that the tipping point for me was Marikana. Marikana was I'll never forget. I cannot tell you how much Marikana changed my life. I was there in the days before the massacre. I was there in the days after the massacre. The only day I wasn't there was the actual day of the massacre, you know. And so I was there for the build-up. I understood fully the pain and the suffering of workers. I was in that meeting when the director of HR refused to engage workers, you know. And we all know a couple of days later they were shot and killed live on TV. And why Marikana was such an important moment for me is because it forced me to ask myself the role that I played in the media for this horrible massacre to have happened. I mean, if you recall some of the reportage that took place around Marikana shortly before and after, There's a professor at the University of Johannesburg who actually did a very specific article around this. She analyzed this. And she spoke about how many media houses characterized workers as violent, being almost animalistic. And when that massacre happened, I had to ask myself deep questions as a journalist. Did I contribute to that narrative? And what did I do to contribute to that narrative? What were some of the messages that were either overtly or, covertly placed in the manner in which I reported on strike action? And there's a lot of that in media. For example, when corporates are corrupt, we don't call it corporate corruption, we call it corporate collusion. There's all these soft words when it comes to the corruption of capital, the brutality of the capitalist system. And then when it comes to characterizing workers fighting for justice, very negative words are used. They are violent, they are mobs, they're angry, So Marikana forced me to reckon with myself as a journalist and my role in the democratic South Africa. What am I contributing towards? And I can tell you from the time that moment happened, my reporting changed. And then my worldview going forward changed in terms of even my interaction with my employers. I started to ask questions, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Because for me, it was a case of, you cannot expect me to go and make demands on Jacob Zuma, but you don't want to explain how and why your organization continues to be racist, And these were issues that we were fighting at ENCA. ENCA at that time frustrated me, was calling itself an African news channel, but God forbid you wear a duk on air, You saw what happened to Nontobeko Subisi and the treatment that she got. So Marikana changed me. And it made me want to be a journalist or a storyteller or a champion of the working class. That's what it did. Because to me, the true heroes are the working class. It was the working class that defeated apartheid. And anytime there have been radical changes, it's because the working class has been involved. And so for me, I felt like it's now my job to take what I know to empower us. And because to do that is to help me and to help future generations. As you say, I was supposed to be working at a progressive news station, and here I am having to justify why I sympathize with Fees Must Fall. That's the kind of backward environment that exists in South African media. It is deeply, structurally racist.
Kim, do you think black South Africans are ready for a black-owned media company? And I'm asking this because at some point or another, you were very frequent on ANN7, and we saw how that got shut down. Do you think that the capitalists in this country, or the powers that be, would allow for a progressive black-owned media company to be out there and be progressive without them being certain elements to shut them down?
No, I don't think that would be allowed. And I was a commentator on ANN7 and I enjoyed it. I thought it was, and I certainly was never told what to say. And in fact, I often said things that were possibly very contrary to what the station was trying to do. I thought it was a space that a lot of people could articulate alternative views. And I think they lived up to that. And the tragedy of shutting down that station is that people lost their jobs. Yeah. Young, black females, some of who have phoned me to say, Kim, I never thought I'd be in this position. I can't feed my child. The casualties of ANN7 actually affected, 300, 400 young black journalists. And it's a tragedy. But organizations like SANEF were very quiet. They were mute, I think, on those kind of things. So we should never have expected ANN7 to survive. Because it wouldn't. It was deliberately closed down. Just before Ramaphosa came in, it was closed down. And I think every black South African should be saying, shame on us who applauded the physical abuse of journalists at ANN7 and how ministers like Pravin Gordhan embarrassed a young, beautiful black journalist, in front of her peers. But I think we have to question, maybe your question goes further than that, is what do black people actually want? Because I think the black mind in South Africa is so occupied by whiteness that black people themselves would rather trust a white media group than a black media group. So black people in this country are just entrenching and enhancing white supremacy. They're not fighting against it. So why are they frequenting, and the regular patrons of news channels that speak against them and put them in a secondary position, who applaud whites all the time and consistently degrade the dignity of black executives, whether they're in government or in the private sector? So the question we should be asking is, why are black people in this country allowing themselves to be the enforcers, perhaps, of white supremacy by favoring white media, by favoring white companies, by favoring white products, white languages, white culture? You know, I think we are in a crisis. That the state of the nation is in crisis, not because of COVID, but because of untreated white power in this country.
Now, in your book, which is my favorite part of the book, you talk about state capture. Mm-hmm. So I want to find out from you, what are your thoughts on the Zondo Commission today?
Well, there's...
Do you want a sip of tea?
No tea. I don't need any tea to say what I'm going to say. You know, the Zondo Commission has become a chamber of black-on-black violence. And because once again we see, and one of my criticisms, and I don't think it's come out in the media at all, is, look, the scope of the Zondo Commission is severely restricted, but deliberately so, because we want to enforce this image that black people are corrupt. I've decided actually that black people are very bad at state capture, because if they can only capture, and if it's true, they can only capture 4% of Eskom contracts, I think they must try and learn from white people how to capture the state. And then black media and black activists and black politicians are so worried about that 4% that Brian Malefe speaks about. What about the remaining percentage? We leave that to whites. You know, whites have the lion's share of land, they have the lion's share of business, they have the lion's share of the economy, and black people are fighting over those crumbs. And I said in another interview, but I would like to repeat it in this one, is that if black people are only interested in the crumbs, that's all they deserve.
Phakamile, with regards to state capture, we've seen how black executives have been removed and white executives has now come in. Do you think that this is now prevalent under this administration, that is deliberately being done?
Well, I think there's certainly an argument around that, because it does seem very clear that the Ramaphosa administration is a slave to whiteness and to white privilege and to white monopoly capital. I think that's very clear. And we've seen a lot of reversals around transformation gains. But I think we also have to go beyond just black and white. I think the demands have to be about breaking down class as well, because our biggest problem is we are being distracted by the factions of the ANC. Sometimes when I watch Zondo Commission, I feel like that's kind of what it is. I feel like I'm watching the factional battles of the ANC playing themselves out in front of the public. And those are things we have to ask deep questions about. When you are promoting a particular narrative and you're anti-Jacob Zuma, for example, but you're pro-Ramaphosa, what do you think that means? What does that actually mean in the lived experiences of ordinary South Africans? And this is why, for me, I don't think we are going to get any, truth or justice. If I might be cynical, but I'm not expecting that from the Zondo Commission. There's been a lot of interesting testimony, but I'm also thinking about all the other commissions that have come before that. We had the one on the arms deal. We had the Marikana Farlam Commission. What came of those commissions? What were the outcomes? Which ministers were fired, dismissed, or prosecuted as a result of those commissions? So I think it's time we start asking, what are we getting from this process? You know, millions are being spent as this commission rolls on. And one of the very important questions that Kim is asking is around the genuine corruptness. Let's talk about state-owned entities, right? Mm-hmm. At Eskom, you know, even now, Eskom's biggest cost driver are the coal contracts awarded to established, mostly white-owned companies. Those are things that you don't hear in the narrative. We keep being told about how Jacob Zuma is responsible for state capture as an individual, as if all the people who currently are in power were not there when the looting was taking place. And this is why I talk about distraction. While they distract us with their factional battles, we don't see how we're being actively looted in front of our eyes. Mm-hmm. As I speak to you now, SAA has basically collapsed, as has SA Express. I'm sure you heard this week the shocking revelations that came out to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, that the SA Express, the last remaining planes were stripped bare, basically didn't even have engines. But workers have gone without salaries since February last year. Yeah. Who's paying the price, the real cost for the corruption that continues even under this administration that's supposed to be cleaner than the previous administration?
Now, Phakamile, you shared a very heartbreaking letter that was published in the IO regarding SA workers that haven't been paid, you know, and I think that deeply broke my heart, if I could say so. Do you think that workers, especially in our SOEs, they're being used as pawns for the greater scheme of things, if I could say so?
Well, I mean, that was a heart-wrenching letter written by a worker himself, talking about his own experiences. He took the risk, as other workers did, to fly to China to rescue stranded South Africans during the coronavirus. There was a time when the media was lauding them as heroes. And what was really painful is that they came home and they found themselves ostracized because of their exposure to the virus. But what was deeply, deeply painful was how the government treated them, that they had to go months without pay and suffer the indignity of not being able to take care of their families when originally they'd been able to do so, you know. And I really do believe, for me, that is one of the greatest failings of the ANC government. The indignity with which workers and their families are treated by this government, with absolute disdain, with, you know, so it's when you say that workers are being used, definitely used for voting, but also very disposable when the ANC decides that's the course of action it wants to take. Right now, the macroeconomic framework that we are pursuing is one where you've got, you know, ratings agencies which are demanding that government must cut back on social spending, must reduce the size of the public sector. And as a result of those demands by foreign white monopoly bankers and capitalists, the ANC government is literally taking a sledgehammer to workers and their families, slashing jobs, slashing incomes, refusing to adhere and uphold an agreement, for example, in the public sector. Workers are basically paying for the failures of this government. I've not seen strong action, really, to back up the tough words of the president when it comes to corruption. I would have thought that heads would have rolled by now when you hear the dire state of some of our state-owned entities, when you look at what's happening in the public health sector, you would think that radical decisions would be taken in the interest of the majority at this point. But instead, they are sticking to these tied and failed strategies of austerity measures. And because it's Black people who are going to suffer, it's okay. And that's what's so painful about having to witness this process for me.
Now, Kim, in your book, you mentioned how Black people are children of a lesser God. Now, we've heard how Phakamile has spoken about the treatment of workers. Does that not make you believe that indeed maybe we are children of a lesser God?
Well, you are children of a lesser God if white monopoly capital and white power is the God in this country, and that seems to be the case. And it's a God that remains. In fact, the ANC government is in the courtesy of a white God. And so as long as that remains, black people will be children of a lesser God. As long as black people are aspiring to be white and looking for white affirmation, they will continue to be children of a lesser God. And that's why I speak about the fact that we need to shut down this rainbow nation, because it actually has created a stillborn democracy. It's made sure that black liberation is nowhere in sight. And the only way out of this, and I speak again as a white person, is to put the dignity of the black child first. If white people want to stay in this country, they shouldn't be the guards. They should be visitors who behave well and do not loot from the real owners of this country. But I think the problem actually is that black people are far more interested in what white people think of them than in what they think of themselves. And I think the trauma of apartheid and colonialism lives with us today. So I'm hoping perhaps it's the generation of my age that have failed to revolutionize or bring about real change. And we're going to hand over that burden to our children. And hopefully they can do better with bringing about fundamental change so that the God of this country is black liberation. And that has to be first and foremost. I mean, the one thing perhaps we haven't discussed today is the issue of land. You know, you're godless if you remain landless, actually. And this whole situation of land being delayed is land that's never. I've said in many interviews that I don't believe that the ANC will ever touch white land. Land will remain in white hands. Maybe a little bit of unoccupied or unprimed land will be given back. But the majority, the tracts of profitable land will remain in white hands. So who is God in this country? Is it not the white man? So perhaps we need to look at the profound Steve Biko quote, "Black man, you're on your own," truly.
Now, Phakamile, do you think we're being too hard on the ANC with regards to land? Because we know how it was formed, you know, the Freedom Charter, and that's why, if we could say that Pan-Africanists left that organization, because they realized we're not going to get our land here and form the peace. Do you think we're being too hard on the ANC?
No, not at all. I think we're actually not being hard enough. I think we're not making enough demands on the ANC. They are the governing party. They're supposed to represent the demands and the desires of the masses, and that's the working class. And what we need is a working class agenda. But when look at our economy, nothing about our economy speaks about pursuing a working class agenda. They've handed everything over to private capital. I mean, let's use the coronavirus pandemic as a classic example. Here you had an opportunity to actually make demands on white capital for the very first time, as dictated to by a global pandemic that was, had taken over the world. You could now make demands on white capital. Oh, but the ANC didn't do that. They would never do that. If you look at how they responded, the banks, for example, were given a choice about whether they should give payment holidays or not. Other progressive countries told the banks, there is a pandemic, you will not demand loan repayments. But our government, I could literally imagine Cyril dialing Rupert, and Rupert telling him exactly what he must do. And you could see it. You could see, based on the choices and the decisions that were made, that, that we even have to have a debate about providing relief for families, and the automatic response is, oh no, we don't have money. Oh no, we don't have money. But we must find the money. We must find the money, because these are unprecedented circumstances where masses and masses and masses of people are dying and will continue to die until radical intervention takes place. Even on the issue of the vaccine, do we know whether every single South African is going to access that vaccine for free? And when? So the thing about the virus is it exposed very, very clearly what are the priorities of government. And so far, the priority of government has been to please white monopoly capital without disrupting it in any way, even though the virus has disrupted it, but to ensure that certainly those big players are able to maintain their control of the economy and over this country.
Now, Kim, as we go to the end of our beautiful tea party, what is your wish for South Africa?
Well, I think can I use my white privilege and speak about three things? First of all, I think we can't speak about justice and liberation in this country without land. And perhaps it's strange for a white person to be pushing this, but I'm recognizing that the terrible disservice that we've done as white people in this country. So land must be returned without condition and without compensation. A second wish is that Steve Biko's book is taught in every single school in this country, that every single South African has to understand that, because I think that's going to change the mind of people in South Africa. The only way forward is through black consciousness in this country. And the third thing is that I would like to change the white consciousness in this country. That's the only thing I can do as a white person, and to just say that reparations have to come into play. And I'm working on some projects on that to just say to white people, really.
Now, you touched on something very interesting. Now, Phakamile, before I ask you what is your wish, do you think that if black consciousness was taught to us at a very young age, that the outcome would be different now, especially with regards to our generation?
I think it's important that I do think that certainly if black consciousness, black radical thinking, if we had transformed our educational system in our image as black people, we would be in a very different place, in a very different space emotionally, psychologically, and economically. I do think also that the politics of class and also that awareness of is extremely important, because we must never ever have a situation where a minority of people hold all of the material wealth over the masses. And yes, in South Africa, it has a racial character. I think we must be very clear that we cannot get away from that. Because how was South Africa formed? It was formed in the belly of the violence that came through colonialism, that came through apartheid. And if you are not going to deal with that radically, for example, take ownership of the land, take ownership of the minerals, and beneficiate them for the benefit of the masses. If you're not going to take decisions, radical decisions like that, then you can't expect the outcome to be different. The ANC government has basically ensured that the way South African power was under apartheid continues. So you first have to deal with that structure. You have to upend that structure. And that requires a revolution. And perhaps, before you ask me, that is my wish for a revolution.
Kim, do you think that we should have had a revolution in '94 instead of a negotiated settlement?
Sure, that's a big question. I think that we need a revolution, but perhaps it's a revolution of the mind, so that we can then look at real fundamental change. And I think we've been in a holding pattern. I think Grumsky speaks about being in this holding position between the old and the new. So we've been in this holding pattern, to use an SAA or airport analogy, and we're getting nowhere. And something has to shift. So, but I think that's obviously going to be driven not by the ANC, because the ANC is pushing the status quo. But let the revolution of the mind, the revolution of thought, let black people recapture the dignity of what they had before the white man came to this country. I think that's the seed of a revolution or radical change.
Now, Phakamile, what would be your wish, especially for you and towards black unity, especially of the working class?
Pardon me. I think for me, really, it would be to see fundamental change in the lives of ordinary South Africans. That's what I wish for. I wish that our parents and our forefathers didn't die in vain. That's what I wish for. And I really hope that I will live to see the day when the black majority is truly free in the true sense of the word in this country.
No White Lies by Kim Heller. Phakamile says it's a brutally honest book. So Kim, where can we get your book?
Various options. People can contact me directly, kimheller.writer@gmail.com, or it is at some bookshops, including Exclusive Books, Exara Books, which is a Pan-Africanist bookshop in Midrand, and there's a Berry Institute in KwaZulu-Natal, where a lot of the demand is coming from. Now have stock of my book. Thank you.
For more uncensored and unfiltered news, do follow us at The Inside Factor on Facebook, as well as at Inside Factor on Twitter. My co-host handle is at Tawamakwakwa, as well as mine at mmudiba10. Do watch our shows every Sunday at 6 p.m. on YouTube. Until next time, guys, good night.